Hello, newcomers or people that have been around the channel for a while. With the recent release of Subnautica 2, which I have gotten a chance to play, and I highly recommend you try it out, I have taken a huge liking to the new creatures in Subnautica 2. And one of the things that made me appreciate Subnautica 1 so much, that does make itself prevalent in Subnautica 2, is just the fact that everything almost feels grounded in a sense. Like, sure, these are, like, alien life forms, but it's not so out there that you feel like they couldn't actually exist. You know, something about them kind of gives off the vibe that these are creatures we could find on the hypothetical chance to be on an alien planet that is mostly overtaken by water. So, today, I decided to make what most of you guys might call a hybrid, and try to recreate these creatures from Subnautica 2 using real-life components from real-life animals. So, with the goal identified, let's get straight to it. To start, I decided to tackle one of the first creatures you see when you leave your life pod in Subnautica 2, being the Hammerhead, a territorial life form that is mostly known for, of course, being in its name, ramming things with its head almost like a hammer. And to start the base of this creature, we will be using the Dunkleosteus. Dunkleosteus will be providing its build and most of its size, as well as its durable head armor, sort of similar to what the Hammerhead has in Subnautica 2. Another key component of the Hammerhead will be achieved through the Swordfish. This will give it its quick burst speed, mostly utilized when fighting off competitors. Next thing we will be adding to our Hammerhead is the Lionfish. Though the Lionfish typically uses these for defense against predators, we will be taking its spine specifically around the head to match the display the Hammerhead shows off before ramming into a potential threat or competitor. We will also be taking the Bumphead Parrotfish for its instinct to ram into things, and to really play into that whole ramming aspect. Now, one thing you might notice about the Hammerhead is the fact this creature has 3 eyes, and there's no good way to add 3 eyes to an animal without taking unrealistic measures that could compromise our creature's ability to function. So we'll almost add a fake 3rd eye by first using the anglerfish. This will mostly provide the placement of its bioluminescent lure, but in that place we will actually be taking a sack of algae from the flashlight fish. The flashlight fish has these sacks of bioluminescent stuff that we will be putting in the center of our fish's head, almost replicating the look of a 3rd eye. And yeah, hopefully this will be able to sell the effect. The other corner we might have to cut is the fact that if you look at the Hammerhead, its mouth opens horizontally, not up and down like most animal mouths do, and there aren't any animals that do this aside from, like, I don't know, I think some species of snails. So we will be taking the closest thing we can from a fish, being the hagfish. Now, you might notice when you look at a hagfish that this mouth isn't usually prevalent, and no, you're not crazy, this isn't something you should have noticed, as it's actually its tongue. Yeah, the hagfish has almost like teeth-like structures on its tongue, and it usually keeps its tongue retracted, although whenever it's eating, its tongue comes out, and almost looks like the horizontal mouth of our Hammerhead, so this will be added to the genome. No, we won't be taking its mucus, as it's not really necessary here. And finally, for the behavior of our Hammerhead, we will be taking the beta fish, or the Siamese fighting fish. This will provide our Hammerhead with the bright colors you see in-game, as well as the instinct to flare out its fins whenever it's in a fight, as Siamese fighting fish will flare their gills and fight nearly to the death against competitors, and our Hammerhead will do the same, only instead of flaring its gills, it will be flaring those spines from the lionfish as a sort of intimidating display. With all of that aside, here is the final result for our Hammerhead hybrid. Its speed is about 30 miles an hour whenever it's bursting, but usually it would maintain a cruising speed of about 5 miles an hour. Its weight is 2 tons, it's 50 feet long, and when ramming at its top speed, it can hit with about 24 to 30,000 newtons of force, which underwater is like the equivalent of getting hit by a small car. In the wild, it would probably remain solitary, mostly cruising around and using its tongue to lick algae and vegetation off of rocks and the ground and other things. But when faced with a rival, it'll tuck its fins back and ram at incredible speeds and forces, and it should replicate what the actual Hammerhead does in Subnautica 2. Well, with that aside, not straying too far from the genome of the Hammerhead, now we'll go to our next hybrid, the Epicuran, a distant relative of the Hammerhead, being more primitive than its ancestor. The Epicuran is a large hippo-like animal that is said previously is a more primitive ancestor of the Hammerhead, and instead of having a more armored-like head for ramming, it decided to evolve massive jaws and lives a much simpler lifestyle, mostly just swimming around aimlessly and eating stuff. And this relation between the Epicuran and the Hammerhead does show through our genome as they share a lot of contributors. To start with what's in common, the Dunkleosteus will be providing the base, giving it all of the same armor, the same build, most of the same stuff, and we will also be using the anglerfish and flashlight fish for the same similar lure mimicking a third eye. We will also be taking the beta fish for a different aspect than last time, and with that, let's get to it. To start, we will be using the sheep's head. Let me explain. Basically, if you look at the jaws of the Epicuran, the teeth layout is similar to, I'd say, like a snake or a monitor lizard, and originally I was going to try to make this thing a reptile, although because of the fin structure I don't really think that's possible, so we will be using the sheep's head. The sheep's head gives us that internal row of teeth that you see on the Epicuran. We will be making these teeth longer with the tigerfish, as the tigerfish, it makes teeth pointy, not much to it. We will also be taking the Komodo dragon, which will give the Epicuran its long tongue, and in this case, it will allow it to sense stuff in the water and find food. Now, using a reptile for the tongue on a fish might be a bit weird, although the thing is, fish really have all the things required to have a tongue, they just don't. So there really isn't anything biologically wrong with giving a fish a tongue, and there are even some fish with tongue-like structures, kind of like the archer fish, which instead of just having a bony plate at the bottom of its mouth, actually does have something that mimics a tongue that it uses to guide water through its mouth. We will also be taking the lionfish, and this also plays into why we're using the beta fish. Instead of for the spines, basically is an intimidation display, the Epicuran will flare its 4 fins around its head as sort of like a, intimidation display. Well, lionfish will actually use their pectoral fins, not their spines, and almost flare them to make themselves look bigger, and beta fish also have this thing, commonly referred to as a beard, that is hooked up to their gills, and also as a display of intimidation, they will flare their gills, popping out this beard, and making themselves look bigger. Combining the movement of the pectoral fins with the beard kind of gets us something that almost looks like the intimidation display that the Epicuran uses in-game. With all of that aside, here is the final design for our Epicuran. It probably won't be as territorial as the Hammerhead, and it'll mostly cruise around, flicking its tongue around trying to pick up scents in the water, and it will mostly utilize its large jaws as a weapon of offense and catching food. It's 15 feet long, has a 30,000 Newton bite, and it swims at roughly 10 miles an hour, cruising at 5 miles an hour, and it weighs in at about 2 tons. Well, with those two done, let's move on to my personal favorite creature in Subnautica 2 that we've seen so far, and probably my second favorite creature in Subnautica yet, as, it's a simple but effective design that I'm quite fond of. So let's introduce the Marrow Breach. Now, unlike all of the other hybrids we'll be making, the Marrow Breach, in this case, I will be making it a reptile-bird sort of hybrid, as it just works better that way, as one thing that's really prevalent with the Marrow Breach is the fact that it has a beak-like structure for a mouth, and with the exception of stuff like the parrotfish, there's no real way to achieve that sort of beak without doing things that probably wouldn't work on a fish. So, for the heck of it, we will be using Tylosaurus rex as the base. Tylosaurus rex was a 70 to 60-ish foot long ichthyosaur that we will be utilizing as our base, and since it is reptilian in nature, this will allow us to maybe take advantage of some components from birds, as they aren't too distant in terms of relation. To start, we will be using the bowhead whale, mostly for its eye placement being as close as we can get to the eye placement on an actual Marrow Breach, as well as its ability to dive, just kind of as like a second thing, just to take from it since we have it in the genome, that makes it so we don't have to further take from additional whales. We will also be removing the back fins, courtesy of the bowhead whale, as they aren't present on the Marrow Breach, so there's no reason to have them here. We will also be using the black dragonfish for its bioluminescence, specifically its spots along its back, as the Marrow Breach is bioluminescent, and we want that to show in our design. We will also be taking the marine iguana to exchange the more shark-like tail of the Tylosaurus for a longer, flatter tail, more akin to the build of the Marrow Breach. And for the beak, we will be using a combination of the beak from the shoebill stork and the hooky pointiness of the gray macaw. We will also be taking the gray macaw's intelligence, just kind of as like a little thing. We will also be taking the leatherback turtle for the spikes inside of its mouth, similar to what's present on the Marrow Breach, and the snapping turtle to fortify the beak to endure powerful bites, as well as some of its jaw muscle that just kind of works with that beak structure. We will also be taking jaw muscle from the saltwater crocodile, and we will also be taking the saltwater crocodile's cardiovascular constriction, which for our newcomers, basically whenever a saltwater crocodile loses a limb, they're able to cut off blood flow to it almost instantly, which really helps as a good adaptation for survival. Finally, to get the colorful patterns on the Marrow Breach's beak, we will be taking the puffin, as well, puffins got colorful beaks. One more thing, we will also be increasing the size of our pectoral fins with the leatherback turtle, just to kind of allow our hybrid to glide easier through the water, since its back fins won't be prevalent anymore. And with our reptilian whale complete, let's go over his stats. Our Marrow Breach sits anywhere between 50 and 60 feet long, which, funny enough, in-game, is actually the lower spectrum on the size of Marrow Breaches, although this does mean our Marrow Breach is technically scale accurate. Its bite force is almost 100,000 newtons, and it swims at roughly 30 miles an hour, about 15 to 20 is a cruising speed, and its weight comes in at about 40-ish tons. In terms of behavior, it will mostly be solitary and act aggressive towards things near it, as the Marrow Breach actually does in-game. With that aside, let's get to the final creature we will be making. This creature in question being the Shiver Leviathan. In-game, the Shiver Leviathan acts as a essential, almost like guard or bouncer, keeping the player out of the void in Subnautica 2, essentially acting as a more interesting way of saying, go back to where you're supposed to be, instead of just putting a wall with like text that says, oh yeah, you've reached the end of the map, which is similar to what they did in Subnautica 1 with the Ghost Leviathans. Now, the Shiver Leviathan has quite the interesting design, with a lot of traits that I'd consider reptilian, similar to the Epicuran, but since there are a lot of things akin to a fish, like those appendages on its lower jaw, its fins, and other characteristics, we will be making this a fish as well. So to start for our base, we will be using the sea robin. Let me explain. The sea robin actually shares a disturbing amount with the Shiver Leviathan, being its large pectoral fins akin to the Shiver Leviathan, as well as them little dingy limbs you see hanging off its bottom jaw. Now, our Shiver Leviathan only has 2 of those, so we will only be taking 2 of those. And though they might not stick outward like they do on the Shiver Leviathan, we will have them, so I guess bonus points for accuracy. We will also be increasing the size of our sea robin with the lead Sichthies, putting this thing at about 50 to 60 feet long. He will also be taking the face armor from the Dunkleosteus, giving our creature an almost skull-looking appearance on its head, as well as the osteoderms from the sturgeon, specifically along the back to mimic that short patch of armor you see coming off of its head. We will also be taking the parrotfish, specifically for the half of the Shiver Leviathan's jaw that's a beak, being its top jaw, while the bottom jaw won't be affected by this contribution. For the bottom jaw, we will be taking the tigerfish, as well as the tigerfish's jaw mechanics, as unlike most fish, which have much more complicated jaws, the tigerfish, similar to most animals, is just simple up and down, akin to what the Shiver Leviathan's jaw mechanics are. So yeah, we will be giving it the jaw of the tigerfish, and the teeth from the alligator gar. The alligator gar will also elongate the head slightly, giving us the head shape that we want. Next, we will be taking the ghost shark, which you might remember from our Ghost Leviathan hybrid. This will be providing its thinner tail and tail fin, as well as a transparent body akin to what the Shiver Leviathan has. On top of this transparent layer from the ghost shark, we will be taking the denticles from the whale shark and modifying them with some of the only transparent scales ever being from the Japanese rice fish, keeping our Leviathan transparent while still maintaining its armor. These final 3 contributors will be dormant in the females, but make themselves prevalent in the males. First, we will be giving them the French angelfish. The French angelfish provides loyalty in the males, as when a male finds a female, it will often stick right by its side, and will do everything it can to avoid leaving its side. We will also be taking the convict Cisalid, I don't know how to pronounce that, but the convict Cisalid will basically provide the instinct for our males to protect the female, as whenever anything shows up that could be a threat, they will leave the female's side and go after it and attack it. And they will also help in hunting food, as the female's body is large and inconvenient to move around, and our males will be a lot smaller. We will also be taking the remora. Now, in-game, the Shiver Leviathans almost swim in a very coordinated fashion, similar to what you'd only see in something like the Blue Angels. But this isn't all too realistic, so we will be giving the males the suckers of the remora. This will allow them to stick to the stomach and pectoral fins of our female, allowing them to really stay by the female's side till necessary to leave. With that aside, let's show off our Shiver Leviathan. The Shiver Leviathan sits at about 60 feet long, so funny enough, the same size as our Marrow Breach. It's 50 tons and has a swim speed of about 15 miles an hour and a bite force of 100,000 newtons. In terms of the much smaller males, the males are only 30 feet long, have a bite force of about 50,000 newtons, ignore the drawing, that was a miscalculation, and a swim speed of about 35 miles an hour, and they weigh in at roughly 7-ish tons. Our Shiver Leviathan family will mostly hang out in open waters, and whenever they see something that could be food, such as maybe a sperm whale or other large animal, the males will be deployed off the female's side and really just attack whatever's there. The males won't really ever leave the female's side, and yeah, I mean, despite the fact that they have the capability of destroying your tadpole, in the end, they're really just like a wholesome family, so power of friendship, I guess. Well, let me know if you enjoyed this video, and what your thoughts on these hybrids were, and if you enjoyed seeing this video and you happen to be new to the channel, I have 2 other videos, one where I make a Reaper Leviathan in this style, and another where I make a Ghost Leviathan, Chelicerate, and a few others. So, with that, if you enjoyed your time here, like, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you later.